instinct which drew him back from his home in Milwaukee. He may have known of the old stories despite his statement to the contrary in the diary, and his death may have nipped in the Haunter of the Dark. HP Lovecraft. Read by Wayne June. I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim. They roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. Cautious investigators will hesitate to challenge the common belief that Robert Blake was killed by lightning or by some profound nervous shock derived from an electrical discharge. It is true that the window he faced was unbroken, but nature has shown herself capable of many freakish performances. The expression on his face may easily have arisen from some obscure muscular source unrelated to anything he saw, while the entries in his diary are clearly the result of a fantastic imagination aroused by certain local superstitions and by certain old matters he had uncovered. For the anomalous conditions at the deserted church of Federal Hill, the shrewd answer from some obscure muscular source unrelated to anything he saw, while the entries in his diary are clearly the result of a fantastic imagination aroused by certain local superstitions and by certain old matters he had uncovered. For the anomalous conditions at the deserted church of Federal Hill, the shrewd answer from some obscure muscular source unrelated to anything. This does not slow in attributing them to some charlatanry, conscious or unconscious, with at least some of which Blake was secretly connected. For after all, the victim was a writer and painter wholly devoted to the field of myth, dream, terror, and superstition, and avid in his quest for scenes and effects of a bizarre, spectral sort. His earlier stay in the city, a visit to a strange old man as deeply given to occult and forbidden lore as he, had ended amidst death and flame, and it must have been some morbid instinct which drew him back from his home in Milwaukee. He may have known of the old stories despite his statement to the contrary in the diary, and his death may have in the bud some stupendous hoax destined to have a literary reflection. Among those, however, who have examined and correlated all this evidence, there remain several who cling to less rational and commonplace theories. They are inclined to take much of Blake's diary at its face value and point significantly to certain facts such as the undoubted genuineness of the old church record, the verified existence of the disliked and unorthodox Starry Wisdom sect prior to 1877, the recorded disappearance of an inquisitive reporter named Edwin M. Lillibridge in 1893, and, above all, the look of monstrous transfiguring fear on the face of the young writer when he died. It was one of these believers who, moved to fanatical extremes, threw into the bay the curiously angled stone and its strangely adorned metal box found in the old church steeple, the black windowless steeple, and not the tower where Blake's diary said those things originally were. Who widely censured, both officially and unofficially, this man, a reputable physician with a taste for odd folklore, averred that he had rid the earth of something too dangerous to rest upon it. Between these two schools of opinion, the reader must judge for himself. The papers have given the tangible details from a skeptical angle, leaving for others the drawing of the picture as Robert Blake saw it, or thought he saw it, or pretended to see it. Now, studying the diary closely, dispassionately, and at leisure, let us summarize the dark chain of events from the expressed point of view of their chief actor. Blake returned to Providence in the winter of 1934-35, taking the upper floor of a venerable dwelling in a grassy court off College Street, on the crest of the great eastward hill near the Brown University campus and behind the marble John Hay Library. It was a cozy and fascinating place, in a little garden oasis of village-like antiquity where huge, friendly cats sunned themselves atop a convenient shed. Square Georgian house had a monitor roof, classic doorway with fan carving, small paned windows, and all the other earmarks of early 19th century workmanship.
You never know with these things, man.
Inside were six.
Anyway, yeah, let's get back down to what we were talking about before I got choked out, throttled. Chat overlay. I don't know what this is. Okay, no, that's not cool. It's goofball, man. I'm trying to use a new website to stream from, and I'm not sure if it's what its problem is, but it doesn't seem to be any better. Okay, no, I haven't. Sadly, I have not. So I think we should keep rolling with the ball on the Wednesday thing. Wednesday. Mercury meetup. So this week's homework for the Mercury meetup is HP Lovecraft's The Haunter of the Dark. And a moment ago, I put the links in the last chat, so I'll put them in the description.
Paneled doors, wide floorboards, a curving colonial staircase, white Adam period mantels, and a rear set of rooms 3 steps below the general level.
Nothing seems to be working.
Blake's study, a large southwest chamber, overlooked the front garden on one side, while its west windows, before one of which he had his desk, faced off from the brow of the hill and commanded a splendid view of the lower town's outspread roofs and of the mystical sunsets that flamed behind them. On the far horizon were the open countryside's purple slopes. Against these, some 2 miles away, rose the spectral hump of Federal Hill, bristling with huddled roots and
so here's a link
remote outlines wavered mysteriously
for the literature this week, my selected reading category.
Swirled up and enmeshed them.
And
Blake had a curious sense that he was looking upon some unknown, ethereal world, which might or might not vanish in dream if he ever tried to seek it out and enter it in person. Having sent home for most of his books, Blake bought some antique furniture.
Here's a link for some audio.
Quarters and settled down to write and paint, living alone and attending to the simple housework himself. His studio was in a north attic room, where the panes of the monitor roof furnished admirable lighting.
Oh God, my leg fell asleep.
During that first winter, he produced 5 of his best-known short stories: The Burrower Beneath, The Stairs in the Crypt, Shagai, In the Vale of Na, and The Feaster from the Stars, and painted 7 canvases, studies of nameless,
so here's a link if you want to just
monsters
get audio
and
for
profoundly alien non-terrestrial landscapes. At sunset, he would often sit at his desk and gaze dreamily off at the outspread west, the dark towers of Memorial Hall just below.
Yeah. So next Sunday,
the lofty pinnacles of the downtown section, and that shimmering spire-crowned mound in the distance whose unknown streets and labyrinthine gables so potently provoked his fancy.
Next Sunday, have some thoughts.
From his few local acquaintances, he learned that the far-off slope was a vast Italian quarter, though most of the houses were remnant of older Yankee and Irish days. Now and then he would train his field glasses on that spectral, unreachable world beyond the curling smoke, picking out individual roofs and chimneys and steeples, and speculating upon the bizarre and curious mysteries they might house. Even with optical aid, Federal Hill seemed somehow alien, half fabulous, and linked to the unreal, intangible marvels of Blake's own tales and pictures. Feeling would persist long after the hill had faded into the violet, lamp-starred twilight, and the courthouse floodlights and the red industrial trust beacon had blazed up to make the night grotesque. Of all the distant objects on Federal Hill, a certain huge, dark church most fascinated Blake. It stood out with a special distinctness at certain hours of the day, and at sunset the great tower and tapering steeple loomed blackly against the flaming sky. It seemed to rest on especially high ground, for the grimy facade and the obliquely seen north side with sloping roof and the tops of great pointed windows rose boldly above the tangle of surrounding ridge bowls and chimney pots. Peculiarly grim and austere, it appeared to be built of stone, stained and weathered with the smoke and storms of a century and more. Style, so far as the glass could show, was that earliest experimental form of Gothic revival which preceded the stately Upjohn period and held over some of the outlines and proportions of the Georgian age. Perhaps it was reared around 1810 or 1815. As months passed, Blake watched the far-off, forbidding structure with an oddly mounting interest. Since the vast windows were never lighted, he knew that it must be vacant. The longer he watched, the more his imagination worked, till at length he began to fancy curious things, believed that a vague, singular aura of desolation hovered over the place, so that even the pigeons and swallows shunned its smoky eaves. Around other towers and belfries his glass would reveal great flocks of birds, but here they never rested. At least that is what he thought and set down in his diary. He pointed the place out to several friends, but none of them had ever been on Federal Hill or possessed the faintest notion of what the church was or had been. In the spring, a deep restlessness gripped Blake. He had begun his long-planned novel, based on a supposed survival of the witch cult in Maine, but was strangely unable to make progress with it. More and more he would sit at his westward window and gaze at the distant hill and the black, frowning steeple shunned by the birds. When the delicate leaves came out on the garden boughs, the world was filled with a new beauty. But Blake's restlessness was merely increased. It was then that he first thought of crossing the city and climbing bodily up that fabulous slope into the smoke-wreathed world of dream. Late in April, just before the eon-shadowed Walpurgis time, Blake made his first trip into the unknown. Plodding through the endless downtown streets and the bleed squares beyond, he came finally upon the ascending avenue of century-worn steps, sagging Doric porches, and blear-paned cupolas which he felt must lead up to the long-known, visible world beyond the mists. There were dingy blue and white street signs which meant nothing to him, and presently he noted the strange, dark faces of the drifting crowds, and the foreign signs over curious shops in brown, decade-weathered buildings. Nowhere could he find any of the objects he had seen from afar, so that once more he half fancied that the Federal Hill of that distant view was a dream world, never to be trod by living human feet. Now and then a battered church facade or crumbling spire came in sight, but never the blackened pile that he sought. When he asked a shopkeeper about a great stone church, the man smiled and shook his head, though he spoke English freely. Blake climbed higher. The region seemed stranger and stranger, with bewildering mazes of brooding brown alleys leading eternally off to the south. He crossed 2 or 3 broad avenues, and once he thought he glimpsed a familiar tower. Again he asked a merchant about the massive church of stone, and this time he could have sworn that the plea of ignorance was feigned. The dark man's face had a look of fear which he tried to hide, and Blake saw him make a curious sign with his right hand. Then suddenly a black spire stood out against the cloudy sky on his left, above the tiers of brown roofs lining the tangled southerly alleys. Blake knew at once what it was, and plunged toward it through the squalid, unpaved lanes that climbed from the avenue. Twice he lost his way, but he somehow dared not ask of the patriarchs or housewives who sat on their doorsteps, or any of the children who shouted and played in the mud of the shadowy lanes. At last he saw the tower plain against the southwest, and a huge stone bulk rose darkly at the end of an alley. Presently he stood in a wind-swept open square, quaintly cobblestoned, with a high back wall on the farther side. This was the end of his quest, for upon the wide iron-railed, weed-grown plateau which the wall supported, a separate, lesser world fully raised 6 feet above the surrounding streets, there stood a grim Titan bulk whose identity, despite Blake's new perspective, was beyond dispute.
It is true that
the vacant church was in a state of great decrepitude. Some of the high stone buttresses had fallen, and several delicate finials got lost among the brown, neglected weeds and grasses. The sooty Gothic windows were largely unbroken, and many of the stone mullions were missing. Dick wondered how the obscurely painted panes could have survived so well in view of the known habits of small boys the world over. The massive doors were intact and tightly closed. Round the top of the back wall, fully enclosing the grounds, was a rusty iron fence whose gate, at the head of a flight of steps from the square, was visibly padlocked. The path from the gate to the building was completely overgrown. Desolation and decay hung like a pall above the place, and in the birdless eaves and black, ivyless walls, Blake felt a touch of the dimly sinister, beyond his power to define. There were very few people in the square, but Blake saw a policeman in the northerly end and approached him with questions about the church. He was a great, wholesome Irishman, and it seemed odd that he would do little more than make the sign of the cross and mutter that people never spoke of that building. When Blake pressed him, he said very hurriedly that the Italian priest warned everybody against it, vowing that a monstrous evil had once dwelt there and left its mark. He himself had heard dark whispers of it from his father, who recalled certain sounds and rumors from his boyhood. There had been a bad...
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking, Chris. I'm just adapting to this new transmission method. You never know when it's working, and when it stumps you so many times, you become a little bit sort of trigger shy. Like you never know what's going on. Twilight. See if I can get into a theatrical voice for this. Give you guys an update. Twilight Zone Old Peking sat at the center of some singular, otherworldly, cosmic maelstrom. The storm over the city was unrelenting and vicious. It was only 2 weeks to the summer solstice, and there had been about 5 solid days of rain and lightning. There were buildings blasted asunder, and large torrents of floodwaters ripped through the streets, drowning people in alarming numbers. It seemed the elder gods had taken away the mandate of heaven from the current holder of the infamous title, Demon King of Peking. The decree for de facto emperor of the kingdom of the celestial dragon was underway, and heaven had spoken. There had been reports by common folk of seeing shadowy, regal figures standing among malignant clouds that hung low in the tumultuous and ever-savage sky. It was as if the dark gods had descended and were keeping court in the gaping Stygian abyss right before my eyes. An everyday man reported and claimed to have seen a group of 3 beings manifest at the heart of a terrifying lightning display with strange luminous spheres. Readers aside. An everyday man reported and claimed to have seen a group of 3 beings manifest at the heart of a terrifying lightning display with strange luminous spheres. He said it was above the main pagoda at the Temple of Heaven historical site. He went on to add, I couldn't fathom whether it was all a potent hallucination inspired by some maddening, electrified environment, or if I was actually viewing the return of the gods themselves. It was increasingly more difficult to come across such reports and musing on the aetherwebs, as the ministry was scrubbing them assiduously and within a couple of minutes of their appearance. But I had an ace in the hand. I was using a kind of augmentation to my scrying device that allowed me to access even the ephemeral impression of the transmissions of certain psychic agents that served as witnesses to the paranormal structure of what old Peking had become. These agents were adepts of the mystery school and had initiated me into a covert order of psionic agents. As one of their order, I worked to thwart the awakening of a nefarious entity of the outer realms that the dark celestials sought to summon. And we had our tools.
There in the old days, an outlaw sect that called up awful things from some unknown gulf of night. It had taken a good priest to exorcise what had come, though there did be those who said that merely the light could do it. If Father O'Malley were alive, there would be many the thing he could tell, but now there was nothing to do but let it alone. It hurt nobody now, and those that owned it were dead or far away. They had run away like rats after the threatening talk in '77, when people began to mind the way folks vanished now and then in the neighborhood. Someday the city would step in and take the property for lack of heirs, but little good would come of anybody's touching it. Better it be left alone for the years to topple, lest things be stirred that ought to rest forever in their black abyss. The policeman had gone. Blake stood staring at the sullen, steepled pile. It excited him to find that the structure seemed as sinister to others as to him, and he wondered what grain of truth might lie behind the old tales the Bluecoat had repeated. Probably they were mere legends evoked by the evil look of the place, but even so, they were like a strange coming to life of one of his own stories. The afternoon sun came up from behind dispersing.
Yeah, that's me right there. I was reading my own writing, Chris. God, I'm choking on my coffee here. But what I'm playing here in the background is Haunter of the Dark. This is the homework for the week for the Mercurial meetup. Wondrous Wednesdays.
But it seemed unable to light up the stained.
The mastermind group of esoteric studies. For the week of, let's see, what is it? 5th of June. 5th of June to, that'd be 12 June. Homework is The Haunter of the Dark. And just listen or read and jot down, if appropriate, jot down some thoughts. That's it. Yeah. Next Sunday we'll chat about it. You got a week. Throw it on in the background once or twice during the week. I put it down in the description. You can check the description even now. It's live. Let me see. It's got 2 audio links and 1 link to text. So that seems correct.
The walls of the old temple that towered on its high plateau, it was odd that the green of spring had not touched the brown, withered growths in the raised iron-fenced yard. Blake found himself edging nearer the raised area and examining the back wall and rusted fence for possible avenues of ingress. There was a terrible lure about the blackened fane which was not to be resisted. The fence had no opening near the steps.
I do envy you a little bit that you've got a paper copy. Maybe I'll print it up on the printer. I've got several old school paperbacks of Lovecraft compiled like probably during the 1970s that I got from like yard sales and used bookstores and stuff. But then I have the one that was recently published at Barnes and Noble's, the giant hardbound, like pseudo leather bound, maybe it was an anniversary, 100-year anniversary edition, I think. Yeah, so like 1913 to 2013 or something like that. I don't know. It's a black copy. I could pull it up, I guess, and have a look. Believe it was the Barnes and Nobles one. Might have been Bookstar. Lovecraft. What would you call that? Anniversary hardcover. Try something like that. Should show it. I don't see it though. There's some nice ones out there. It is Tales of Horror. That one's by Walmart though. That's not the one I got. Let me try to find the one I got. But it's back in the States. I don't have a copy of it with me. Might be this one, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, it's the Barnes and Noble one. Kind of nice. I'll click on it here and say, oh, I can't share on here. Oh, maybe I can. Maybe I can. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so I've got, someone gave me the Poe, a copy of the Edgar Allan Poe for a birthday gift. I believe it's my mother. And then I bought the Lovecraft one on my own because I liked the Barnes and Noble presentation. And the quality of the pages is so luxurious. I mean, oh my God, it's unbelievable. It's like high quality Bible type material. Let me see if I can share my window. I don't know if I can, man. Is this gonna work? Share screen. What the? Boop. All right, that looks like something, huh? Yeah, so this one right here, I have a copy of this back home. Cthulhu Mythos Tales. I believe I have this one too. Who did this one? This is Barnes and Noble, Great Tales of Terror. Yeah, I've got this one too. I might have even bought this Walmart one. This one says it's from Walmart. No, that's Barnes and Nobles. They've done quite a few, huh? I've got one of them back home. I can't remember exactly which one it was. Wow. Barnes and Noble is quite the resource back there in the States. If they're still open, I don't even know if they're open anymore. Are they? Is Barnes & Noble still open, guys? That was horrifying. Did you see that? Wow, there it goes again. It's like looking into a vortex of Frank Mondays. It goes on ad nauseum. All right, I turned it off. Let's see if it sticks. Yeah, it looks like it's going to stick. All right, let me get back over here and check the chat. The chat on the StreamYard doesn't seem to be responding.
But round on the north side were some missing bars. He could go up the steps and walk round on the narrow coping outside the fence till he came to the gap.
Oh, let me see what I
The
missed.
people feared the place so wildly he would encounter no interference. He was on the embankment and almost inside the fence before anyone noticed him.
Yeah, next Sunday we chat about
Then, looking
Altar of the
down,
Dark.
he saw the few people in the
Right on,
square
we'll do it. Got to
edging
open on a
away
tab. Good.
and making the same sign with their right hands that the shopkeeper in the avenue had made. Several windows were slammed down.
Yeah, it may or may not be in there. Who knows? If it's not, just check out the audio. It's nice to have both. I like to do both. And if I don't have a good audio for a passage that I like to read, then I'll do my own audio. You've seen I did a relatively serviceable rendition of Lovecraft's The Alchemist. Okay, good. I hope you enjoy it, man. Let's do it that way. I'll research it too. It's like Fight Club. Everybody decides their own level of involvement. Everyone decides their own level of involvement. Yeah, so if you just read it, you get a general impression, and or if you read it and you do a short summary with attendant notes, whatever you like, up to you. No pressure, zero pressure. Though a little pressure helps to motivate an individual. If you're already busy with a lot of projects, obviously you can't do much. But just as a little side motivation, it doesn't have to be, it's not thumb screws. I'm not gonna take you out and hang you from your nipples with fish hooks. Hang you with fish hooks from your nipples in the desert, above, from an ancient tree above some cactus, and then throw honey on your body and put an anthill underneath you. That sounds savage, huh? Imagine being an old Joshua tree, first year, what's the word? Flagulated with a cat of nine tails, and then rub salt in all your wounds, and then hang you up by your nipples with fish hooks, and then drip honey down your body, and all over an anthill of fire ants. Oh, and then the gloves of ants too on your hands and feet with a ball gag. Does that sound like yeah, does that sound like something you might enjoy? It's a great chance to dive into Lovecraft. Been thinking about it for quite a bit recently, funnily. Okay, cool. I hope so, man. Enjoy it. It'll be fun to banter it. I've had word. It's how I feel like on most days, Chris, to be honest with you. Looks like we lost Monsieur Tiedrick. I have not. So Monsieur Tiedrick keeps asking me if I've been keeping up with AJ, but I haven't. I've spent all day looking after my. Anyone seen Owen? Oh, he's rubbing some ointment on. You need the aloe vera, Jeff. Old white pasty guys burn easily. I see that. You've had worse, yeah. That sounds like a delight. That's the level of freedom that will get you into the heavenly kingdom. Anything short of that, and you're probably jerking yourself off. You know, you're tugging at your own chain.
And a fat woman darted into the street and pulled some small children inside a rickety, unpainted house. The gap in the fence was very easy to pass through, and before long, Blake found himself wading amidst the rotting, tangled growths of the deserted yard. Here and there, the worn stump of a headstone told him that there had once been burials in the field, but that, he saw, must have been very long ago. The sheer bulk of the church was oppressive now that he was close to it, but he conquered his mood and approached to try the 3 great doors in the facade. All were securely locked, so he began a circuit of the Cyclopean building in quest of some minor and more penetrable opening. Even then, he could not be sure that he wished to enter that haunt of desertion and shadow. Yet the pull of its
Ne te quesavarius extra, from Perseus Satires 1:7. Man is his own star, and the soul that can render an honest and a perfect man command all light, all influence, all fate. Nothing to him falls early or too late. Our acts, our angels are, or good or ill, our fatal shadows that walk by us still. Epilogue to Beaumont and Fletcher's Honest Man's Fortune, 1647. Cast the bantling on the rocks, suckle him with the she-wolf's teat, wintered with the hawk and fox, power and speed be hands and feet.
strangeness dragged him on automatically. Yawning an unprotected cellar window in the rear furnished the needed aperture. Peering in, Blake saw a subterranean gulf of cobwebs and dust faintly lit by the western sun's filtered rays. Debris, old barrels, and ruined boxes and furniture of numerous sorts met his eye, though over everything a shroud of dust which softened all sharp outlines. Rusted remains of a hot air furnace showed that the building had been used and kept in shape as late as mid-Victorian times.
I gotta make another one of these.
Almost without conscious initiative, Blake crawled through the window and let himself down to the dust-carpeted and debris-strewn concrete floor. Vaulted cellar was a back one, without partitions, and in a corner far to the right, amid dense shadows, he saw a black archway, evidently leading up. He felt a peculiar sense of oppression at being actually within the great spectral building, but kept it in check as he cautiously scouted about, finding a still intact barrel amid the dust and rolling it over to the open window to provide for his exit. Then, bracing himself, he crossed the wide, cobweb-festooned space toward the arch. Half choked with the omnipresent dust and covered with ghostly gossamer fibers, he reached and began to climb the worn stone steps which rose into the darkness. He had no light, but groped carefully with his hands. After a sharp turn, he felt a closed door ahead, and a little fumbling revealed its ancient latch. It opened inward, and beyond it he saw a dimly illumined corridor lined with worm-eaten paneling. Once on the ground floor, Blake began exploring in a rapid fashion. All the inner doors were unlocked, so that he freely passed from room to room. The colossal nave was an almost eldritch place, with its drifts and mountains of dust over box pews, altar, hourglass pulpit, and sounding board, and its titanic ropes of cobweb stretching among the pointed arches of the gallery. and entwining the clustered Gothic columns. Over all this hushed desolation played a hideous leaden light as the declining afternoon sun sent its rays through the strange, half-blackened panes of the great apsidal windows.
Yeah, my old lady will kill me if I look here rather than directly under the expand. She's worried that a whiff of smoke may drift into the house. And she's extremely averse to tobacco smoke, which is interesting because she married a smoker. She knew full well that I was a smoker and a drinker before we got married. And I said, chances are I'll never give up my tobacco. The alcohol I gave up pretty quick. But tobacco is something I enjoy. And I don't, who was it that said, I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, never trust a man who doesn't have at least one. So Franklin, if you remember in his autobiography, Benjamin Franklin, he would choose 13 virtues in a year to work on. And one of those, the hardest, he said, was organization. He never was able to get himself organized to the level that he wanted. And he said, each 13 virtues in each one you should work on for, what, a couple of weeks? No, maybe a month. Less than a month. 13, that's the number of lunar cycles in a year. Interesting that he should choose 13. That's right. That's right. I agree with that, man. Let me work on that coffee real quick.
Paintings on those windows were so obscured by soot that Blake could scarcely decipher what they had represented. From the little he could make out, he did not like them. The designs were largely conventional, and his knowledge of obscure symbolism told him much concerning some of the ancient patterns. The few saints depicted bore expressions distinctly open to criticism, while one of the windows seemed to show merely a dark space with spirals of curious luminosity scattered about in it. Turning away from the windows, Blake noticed that the cobwebbed cross above the altar was not of the ordinary kind, but resembled the primordial Ankh, or Crux Ansata, shadowy Egypt. In the rear vestry room beside the apse, Blake found a rotting desk and ceiling-high shelves of mildewed, disintegrating books. Here, for the first, he received a positive shock of objective horror, for the titles of those books told him much. They were the black, forbidden things which most people have never even heard of, or have heard of only in furtive, timorous whispers. The banned, dreaded repositories of equivocal, secret, and arboreal formulae which had trickled down the stream of...
Good to hear. We're about 20 minutes in on this one. This particular, and this one's read by, I forget who he said. Let me check it real quick. This one, Lovecraft, Haunter of the Dark, narrated by Wayne June, black screen audiobook.
I'm from the days of man's youth, and the dim, fabulous days before man.
I try to listen to multiple renditions when I enjoy
He
the
had
text.
himself read many of them. A Latin version of the abhorred Necronomicon, sinister Liber Ibonis, the infamous Code de Ghoul of Comte de Lette, the Unes Fratration Kulten of Von Junts, and old Ludwig Prin's hellish Vivernis Mysterious. But there were others he had known merely by reputation, or not at all. The Narcotic Manuscripts, the Book of Dizan, and a crumbling volume of wholly unidentifiable characters, yet with certain symbols and diagrams shudderingly recognizable to the occult student. Clearly, the lingering local rumors had not lied. This place had once been the seat of an evil older than mankind and wider than the known universe. In the ruined desk was a small, leather-bound record book filled with entries in some odd cryptographic medium. The manuscript writing consisted of the common traditional symbols used today in astronomy and anciently in alchemy, astrology, and other dubious arts. The devices of the sun, moon, planets, aspects, and zodiacal signs. Here massed in solid pages of text, with divisions and patterns suggesting that each symbol answered to some alphabetical letter. In the hope of later solving the cryptogram, Blake bore up.
One of the fun things I find about Lovecraft, and he kind of introduced it to the genre, I guess. Well, he learned it from Edgar Allan Poe, really, was the idea of a dubious narrator telling the story. So someone who themselves kind of a fun aspect of Lovecraft's writing. I think it was unique to Edgar Allan Poe, or at least that's what most accounts claim. Yeah, the unreliable narrator.
This volume in his
That's
coat
right.
pocket. Many of the great tomes on the shelves fascinated him unutterably, and he felt tempted to borrow them at some later time. He wondered how they could have remained undisturbed so long. Was he the first to conquer the clutching, pervasive fear which had for nearly 60 years protected this deserted place from visitors? Having now thoroughly explored the ground floor, Blake plowed again through the dust of the spectral nave to the front vestibule, where he had seen a door and staircase leading up to the blackened tower and steeple, objects so long familiar to him at a distance. The ascent was a choking experience, for dust lay thick, while the spiders had done their worst in this constricted place. The staircase was a spiral, with high, narrow wooden treads, and now and then Blake passed a clouded window looking dizzily out over the city. Though he had seen no ropes below, he expected to find a bell or peal of bells in the tower whose narrow, louver-boarded lancet windows his field glass had studied so often. Here he was doomed to disappointment, for when he attained the top of the stairs, he found the tower chamber vacant of chimes, and clearly devoted to vastly different purposes. The room, about 15 feet square, was faintly lighted by 4 lancet windows, one on each side, which were glazed within their screening of decayed louver boards. These had been further fitted with tight, opaque screens, but the latter were now largely rotted away. In the center of the dust-laden floor rose a curious angled stone pillar home, 4 feet in height and 2 in average diameter, covered on each side with bizarre, crudely incised and wholly unrecognizable hieroglyphs. On this pillar rested a metal box of peculiarly asymmetrical form, its hinged lid thrown back, and its interior holding what looked beneath the decade-deep dust to be an egg-shaped or irregularly spherical object some 4 inches through. Around the pillar in a rough circle were 7 high-backed Gothic chairs, still largely intact, while behind them, ranging along the dark-paneled walls, were 7 colossal images of crumbling, black-painted plaster, resembling more than anything else the cryptic carven megaliths of mysterious Easter Island. In one corner of the cobweb chamber, a ladder was built into the wall, leading up to the closed trap door of the windowless steeple above. As Blake grew accustomed to the feeble light, he noticed odd bas-reliefs on the strange open box of yellow metal.
There it is there, the bas-reliefs. You'll hear about those in just about every story Lovecraft wrote. A bas-relief. 'Bas relief. 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 '
Approaching, he tried to clear the dust away with his hands and handkerchief, and saw that the figurines were of a monstrous and utterly alien kind, depicting entities which, though seemingly alive, resembled no known life forms ever evolved on this planet. The 4-inch seeming sphere turned out to be a nearly black, red striated polyhedron with many irregular flat surfaces, either a very remarkable crystal of some sort or an artificial object of carved and highly polished mineral matter. It did not touch the bottom of the box, but was held suspended by means of a metal band around its center, with 7 queerly designed supports extending horizontally to the angles of the box's inner wall near the top. This stone, once exposed, exerted upon Blake an almost alarming fascination. He could scarcely tear his eyes from it, and as he looked at its glistening surfaces, he almost fancied it was transparent, with half-formed worlds of wonder within. Into his mind floated pictures of alien orbs with great stone towers, and other orbs with Titan mountains and no mark of life, and still remoter spaces where only a stirring in vague blacknesses told of the presence of consciousness and will. He did look away. It was to notice a somewhat singular mound of dust in the far corner near the ladder to the steeple. Just why it took his attention he could not tell, but something in its contours carried a message to his unconscious mind. Plowing toward it and brushing aside the hanging cobwebs as he went, he began to discern something grim about it. Hand and handkerchief soon revealed the truth, and Blake gasped for the baffling mixture of emotions. It was a human skeleton, and it must have been there for a very long time. The clothing was in shreds, but some buttons and fragments of cloth bespoke a man's gray suit. There were other bits of evidence: shoes, metal clasps, huge buttons for round cuffs, a stick pin of a bygone pattern, a reporter's badge with the name of the old Providence Telegram, and a crumbling leather pocketbook. Blake examined the latter with care, finding within it several bills of antiquated issue, a celluloid advertising calendar for 1893, some cards with the name Edwin M. Lillibridge, and a paper covered with penciled memoranda. The paper held much of a puzzling nature, and Blake read it carefully at the dim westward window. Its disjointed text included such phrases as the following: Professor Enoch Bowen, home from Egypt, May 1844. Buys Old Free Will Church in July. His archaeological and studies in occult well known. Dr. Drown of Fourth Baptist warns against starry wisdom in sermon 29 December 1844. Congregation 97 by end of 45. 1846. 3 disappearances. First mention of shining trapezohedron. 7 disappearances. 1848. Stories of blood sacrifice begin. Investigation 1853 comes to nothing. Stories of sounds. Father O'Malley tells of devil worship with box found in great Egyptian ruins. Says they call up something that can't exist in light, flees a little light, and banished by strong light. Then it has to be summoned again. Probably got this from deathbed confession of Francis X. Feeney, who had joined Starry Wisdom in 49. These people say the shining trapezohedron shows them heaven and other worlds, and that the haunter of the dark tells them secrets in some way. Story of Orrin B. Eddy, 1857. They call it up by gazing at the crystal and have a secret language of their own. 200 or more in congregation 1863, exclusive of men at front. His mob church in 1869 after Patrick Regan's disappearance. Failed article in J, 14 March 72, but people don't talk about it. 6 disappearances 1876. Secret committee calls on Mayor Doyle. Action promised February 1877. Church closes in April. Gang, Federal Hill Boys, threatened doctor and vestryman in May. 181 persons leave city before end of 77. Mention no names. Ghost stories begin around 1880. Try to ascertain truth of report that no human being has entered church since 1877. Ask Lanigan for photograph of place taken 1851. Storing the paper to the pocketbook and placing the latter in his coat, Blake turned to look down at the skeleton in the dust. The implication of the notes were clear, and there could be no doubt but that this man had come to the deserted edifice 42 years before, in quest of a newspaper sensation which no one else had been bold enough to attempt. Perhaps no one else had known of his plan. Who could tell? But he had never returned to his paper. Had some bravely suppressed fear risen to overcome him and bring on sudden heart failure? Blake stooped over the gleaming bones and noted their peculiar state. Some of them were badly scattered, and a few seemed oddly dissolved at the ends. Others were strangely yellowed, with big suggestions of charring. This charring extended to some of the fragments of clothing. The skull was in a very peculiar state, stained yellow, and with a charred aperture in the top as if some powerful acid had eaten through the solid bone. What had happened to the skeleton during its 4 decades of silent entombment here, Blake could not imagine. Before he realized that he was looking at the stone again, and letting its curious influence call up a nebulous pageantry in his mind. Saw processions of robed, hooded figures whose outlines were not human, and looked on endless leagues of desert lined with carved, sky-reaching monoliths. He saw towers and walls in nighted depths under the sea, and vortices of space where wisps of black mist floated before thin shimmerings of cold purple haze. And beyond all else he glimpsed an infinite gulf of darkness, where solid and semi-solid forms were known only by their windy stirrings, and cloudy patterns of force seemed to superimpose order on chaos and hold forth a key to all the paradoxes and arcana of the worlds we know. Then all at once the spell was broken by an access of gnawing, indeterminate panic, fear. Blake choked and turned away from the stone, conscious of some formless aliens close to him and watching him with horrible intentness. He felt entangled with something which was not in the stone, but which had looked through it at him. Something which would ceaselessly fill him with a cognition that was not physical sight. Only the place was getting on his nerves, as it well might in view of his gruesome find. The light was waning too, and since he had no illuminant with him, he knew he would have to be leaving soon. It was then, in the gathering twilight, he thought he saw a faint trace of luminosity in the crazily angled stone. He had tried to look away from it, but some obscure compulsion drew his eyes back. Was there a subtle phosphorescence of radioactivity about the thing? What was it that the dead man's notes had said concerning a shining trapezohedron? What, anyway, was this abandoned lair of cosmic evil? What had been done here, and what might still be lurking in the bird-shunned shadows? It seemed now as if an elusive touch of fear had arisen somewhere close by, though its source was not apparent. Blake seized the cover of the long open box and snapped it down. It moved easily on its alien hinges and closed completely over the unmistakably glowing stone. Sharp click of that closing, a soft stirring sound seemed to come from the steeple's eternal blackness overhead beyond the trapdoor. Rats, without question. The only living things to reveal their presence in this accursed pile since he had entered it. And yet that stirring in the steeple frightened him horribly, so that he plunged almost wildly down the spiral stairs, across the ghoulish nave, into the vaulted basement, out amidst the gathering dust of the deserted square, and down through the teeming, fear-haunted alleys and avenues of Federal Hill, towards the sane central streets and the home-like brick sidewalk of the college district. During the days which followed, Blake told no one of his expedition. Instead, he read much in certain books, examined long years of newspaper files downtown, and worked feverishly at the cryptogram in that leather volume from the cobweb vestry room. The cipher, he soon saw, was no simple one, and after a long period of endeavor he felt sure that its language could not be English, Greek, French, Spanish, Italian, or German. Evidently he would have to draw upon the deepest wells of his strange erudition. Every evening the old impulse to gaze westwards returned, and he saw the black steeple as of yore amongst the bristling roofs of a distant and half-fabulous world. But now it held a fresh note of terror for him. He knew the heritage of evil lore it masked, and with the knowledge his vision ran riot in queer new ways. The birds of spring were returning, and as he watched their sunset flights, he fancied they avoided the gaunt lone spire as never before. When a flock of them approached it, he thought, they would wheel and scatter in panic confusion, and he could guess at the wild titterings which failed to reach him across the intervening miles. It was in June that Blake's diary told of his victory over the cryptogram. The text was, he found, in the dark Aklo language used by certain cults of evil antiquity, and known to him in a halting way through previous researches. The diary is strangely reticent about what Blake deciphered, but he was patently awed and disconcerted by his results. There are references to a haunter of the dark, awakened by gazing into the shining trapezohedron, and insane conjectures about the black gulps of chaos from which it was called. The being is spoken of as holding all knowledge and demanding monstrous sacrifices. Some of Blake's entries show fear lest the thing which he seemed to regard as summoned stalk abroad, though he adds that the streetlights form a bulwark which cannot be crossed. Of the shining trapezohedron he speaks often, calling it a window on all time and space, and tracing its history from the days it was fashioned on dark Yoggoth, before ever the old ones brought it to earth. It was treasured and placed in its curious box by the crinoid things of Antarctica, salvaged from their ruins by the serpent men of Alesia, and eons later in Lemuria by the first human being. It crossed strange lands and stranger seas, and sank with Atlantis. A Minoan fisher meshed in his net and sold it to swarthy merchants from knighted Kem. The pharaoh Nephron-Ka built around it a temple with a windowless crypt, and did that which caused his name to be stricken from all monuments and records. Then it slept in the ruins of that evil fane which the priests and the new pharaoh destroyed, till the Delver's spade once more brought it forth to curse mankind. Early in July, the newspapers oddly supplement Blake's entries, though in so brief and casual a way that only the diary has called general attention to their contribution. It appears that a new fear had been growing on Federal Hill since a stranger had entered the dreaded church. The Italians whispered of unaccustomed stirrings and bumpings and scrapings in the dark, windowless steeple, and called on their priests to banish an entity which haunted their dreams. Something, they said, was constantly watching at a door to see if it were dark enough to venture forth. Press items mentioned the long-standing local superstitions, but failed to shed much light on the earlier background of the horror. It was obvious that the young reporters of today are no antiquarians. In writing of these things in his diary, Blake expresses a curious kind of remorse, and talks of the duty of burying the shining trapezohedron and of banishing what he had evoked by letting daylight into the hideous jutting spire. At the same time, however, he displays the dangerous extent of his fascination and admits a morbid longing, pervading even his dreams, to visit the accursed tower and gaze again into the cosmic secrets of the glowing stone. And something in the journal on the morning of July 7th threw the diarist into a veritable fever of horror. It was only a variant of the other half-humorous items about the Federal Hill restlessness, but to Blake it was somehow very terrible indeed. In the night, a thunderstorm had put the city's lighting system out of commission for a full hour, and in that black interval the Italians had nearly gone mad with fright. Those living near the dreaded church
Yeah, I'm working on another cup of Joe, Jeff. Good suggestion. So I'm checking the chat now to keep up with you guys. Chris says, which area, Cali? What was I talking about? No. Although, yeah, when I was a kid, in Cali, we don't have flea markets, or they don't call them that anyway. They call them swap meets. So my mother's family is from the Tennessee River Valley area. And over there, they call them flea markets because they include livestock. And yeah, hello again. Hey, Jeff's back. Good to see you, Jeff. I'm going to read a short piece for you guys real quick here. Make sure my stream's still clear. Give me a yo if you can hear me all right. Can you hear me all right out in Happy Land? Give me a yo if you can hear me. Yeah, Jeff looks like Jeff's back. So I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter, which were original and not conventional. Always the soul hears an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men. That is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For always the innermost becomes the outermost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. With the final judgment in mind, as you may know, let's see if we can find how long it takes us. Maybe we can cut right to it. See if I got that kind of luck. Final judgment, show yourself. No. No. All right, we'll sort through it. Ah, there it is, one far. It was towards the bottom. I had an inclination, but I didn't know for sure. Let's reread that sentence one time with the final judgment in hand. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in private, that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men. That is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For always the inmost becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. So there you have it. Geared back to you by the last judgment. Let's see, where can I put it? It feels a little high to me. That's okay. I guess it's appropriate that the final judgment is above my head there. Let's boop. Yo, 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 I can see those yo's. That means my signal strength must be okay. Yeah, I did. I grew up in Los Angeles. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, Jeff. in Nolo. I'm a Nolo bro, North Long Beach. That is the Judgment card. It's the Revelation, the 20th card of the tarot. It's the Fool cycle is almost complete. The next card, the World card, makes a complete cycle. The Aeon, the universe. But yeah, that's the 20th card there. Two wheels of fortune, two cycles, the up cycle and the down cycle. So that's the bottom of the down cycle. And hopefully we're at the end of this dark, treacherous cycle, man. Everybody knows what's going on. Don't even need to say it. Familiar as the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit was ascribed to Moses, Plato, and Milton, is that they set at naught books and traditions, and spoke not what men thought, but what they thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across the mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. When two things in note to that. Number one, when I started reading and writing about high school level, I thought, why should I spend 100% of my time reading and listening to others speak and pontificate on truths that are intrinsic and inherent to my own soul? And I knew this early on, man, as a young man. And it wasn't hubris. It was a gentle caution towards being fumigated and obfuscated by other people's pontifications. And it's like, why is their opining so important when I'm the one at the center of my own kingdom, right? So I always vowed that I would do at least 1/10 of creative production. So for every 10 hours of audio or YouTube type stuff that I listen to, I have to do at least an hour of transmission. And for every 100 books I read, I have to write one of my own books. Or as in my 30s to 40s for an entire decade, I pretty much just abandoned all form of outward speculation and based everything on my own journaling with next to nil influence from the outside world, and especially the Western world. Yeah, so fun times. It seems that, well, Ralph Waldo Emerson agrees with me. Greats of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. Okay, it says, yet he dismisses without notice his own thought because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impressions with good-humored inflexibility. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impressions with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say, with masterly good sense, precisely what we had thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. Yeah. I immersed myself in this style of thinking in my late teens and early 20s. These were the guys for me, man, the American transcendentalists. combined with a healthy dose of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, right? Taoism and Kung Fu. Every day doing Kung Fu and contemplating my own thoughts and the thoughts of the likes of, like I've said, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Charles Dickens, Poe, and Lovecraft. Let me check the chat, guys. Yeah, Jeff, I grew up in Los Angeles. I was there until about 22, 23. Sometimes I'd go back off and on in my mid-20s until I moved to, still go back every couple of years. I got family there, Southern California, San Diego, LA area. We're all from the Los Angeles forest. So I have roots in LA, but my folks moved there. My father was originally born in New York, and my mother was born, I believe, in Wyoming. And her mother was Tennessee Valley girl. And my folks moved to Los Angeles. My dad moved there, I believe, after World War II, so 1950s. But he was stationed out of Long Beach. Like I told you, he was Navy intel. So I'm from a seaman, as you may recall, irradiated seaman. I was birthed and summoned in at the Able Baker Bikini Atoll blast. So that's when I came into being. It took an atomic explosion. What was it? 10 kiloton atomic explosion to wake me up from the sea bottom. And then I was born. So I'm truly a son of Dagon. I don't know, man, Jeff. I've been, I go nuclear occasionally. You guys know that shit. I don't know, man. I just, it is what it is. I've never weighed more than like 140 pounds, 142. I think that recently, since this lockdown, I've jumped up to about 150. But I like to keep it trimmed down at around 135 pounds. I guess that's about 70 kilos. So I've weighed that since I was 18. Coffee and cigarettes, I guess, man. That must be the answer. Black coffee and strong cigarettes is what keeps you lean. There's a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, and that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him, but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him by Mother Nature to till this plot of ground. I eat a regular 2-3 times a day, guys, but I eat smaller portions, and you guys know I'm a breatharian, that I take in a lot of my nourishment through the sacred Mars herb, tobacco. I learned that from a 104-year-old woman. She was up to 5 packs of Moors a day, the long skinny ones, and she kept a pistol under her pillow, and she lived to 104. She said that black coffee and cigarettes was the key to longevity. I met her when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and so I was just coming into the world, and she was headed out, and her daughters were like in their 80s and 90s, and I said, "How old's the old woman?" And they said she's 102 or 3 when I met her, and she ended up living to 104. And I asked, how does she do it? And they said, I remember them saying it all the time. Every time I walked by as a little kid, and I would see her on the porch. She came out each morning to have a cup of black coffee and smoke her cigarettes. And she said black coffee and cigarettes was the key to longevity, and occasionally a shot of whiskey. She would only have coffee in the morning, though, and then she would have tea in the afternoon. I remember her quite well. I don't remember her name. If I thought on it for a while, I could probably recall her name and her daughter's name. She had two daughters that were both like, one was early 80s, one was like late 80s, octogenarians, and the mother was over 100. She was like 104. The power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. Not not for nothing one face, one character, one fact makes much impression on him, and another none. It is not without pre-established harmony, this sculpture in the memory. It is not without pre-established harmony, this sculpture in the memory. The eye was placed where one ray should fall, that it might testify of that particular ray. Bravely let him speak the utmost syllable of his confession. We but half express ourselves and are ashamed of that divine idea which each of us represents. It may be safely trusted as proportionate and of good issues. So it be faithfully imparted, but God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. It needs to be divine man to exhibit any divine thing. Wow, how did that happen, man? That clicked on by itself. Ha! Oh, I must have touched something on the keyboard. I'll tell you what Master Nihua Ching told me about Wade. He was the eldest, most respected doctor of Oriental medicine in the United States, in Southern California. Had his own book publishing company, his own University of Chinese Medicine, TCM, Traditional Chinese Medicine, and he had all other societies that Master Ni started. And he told me, he said that when people are happy, they will achieve their ideal weight. And so if you get into a heart-centered sense of awareness, he said it really doesn't matter what you eat or drink or your lifestyle. He said you need to get yourself into the center of your being. And once you're there, just like Thoreau's saying, Emerson is saying right here, once you admit that the divine spark of creative genius is burning bright within your heart, then you will achieve your ideal equilibrium. And everything else is subsequent. Doesn't even need to be worried about. Just totally ignore all that horse shit. You're going to live out your own destiny based on this right here. 50 of these guys. Don't forget 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3, 4, 5. Pound the drum. Remember that Dantian means elixir field. There are 3 elixirs in the body. Pound them 50 times each daily. If you like, or just do the center one 50 times. But you could 50 pounds on the low Dantian. All right, a little bit of a belly there. 50 pounds on the high Dantian. And then I don't really recommend pounding the top Dantian, but you could if you wanted. I don't see anything wrong with it. Typically, the way we tap the top Dantian is this way. Let me show you. So you rub a little bit, and then you cover the ears, make a hermetic seal, suction cover, and then pound. Nine times that way, and then pop the ears 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and then tap the head this way. Seven rotations. Inhale to the right, exhale to the left. That's the way to get it done. Yeah, it's a good question, Chris. I'm glad you asked. A Dantian is the Chinese way to say elixir field. F-I-E-L-D? Is that the way to spell field? Or F-E-I-L? I before E, except after C. Yeah, no, they're a psychosoma etheric center of energy. Imagine it like a spiraling vortex of creative potential. The lower Dantian is typically the one that people refer to as, you can spell it T-I-E-N or T-I-A-N. So Dantian, there's even good wikis on it. I mean, the Wikipedia explanation is pretty good. So the lower Dantian, the Dantians are precursors. They're the realm of preforms, and they give birth to all of the other things in your psychic aura. So the lower Dantian, the lower elixir field is, if you correspond it to the tree of life, then it's Yasad. But Yasad is actually at the perineum. It's a little bit lower. Whereas the Dantian is just it's a field of everything in that field is included. The chakra system is a little more complex than the Dantian. The Dantian system is esoteric Taoism, whereas the chakra is Hindu. So they're different explanations. In the chakra system, I think there are 7 or 9 chakras. Is that correct? But here's my own personal discovery, not based on any of the teachings out there, but my own unique discovery of how these things operate. The Dantians are vortexes of energy, heating centers, alchemical centers within the body. The top Dantian includes the zodiacal crown, the golden zodiacal crown with its 12 celestial influences. It connects directly to the Big Dipper at the byway spot. Okay, the third eye comes out of the upper Dantian. It's the celestial Dantian. It's heaven's energy coming down into the body through spirit. Then the lower Dantian is your psychosexual center. It's the root of earth. So it comes up from the earth into the body. So the Star of David shows one triangle coming down and one triangle going up. And then dead center, those two triangles merge and become the symbol of David, right? And that's the center Dantian. And it's truly Tifereth on the tree of life. For me, Keter, Okma, and Bina are actually outside of the body. And so if you put your hands up like this, you have Keter and Bina just within grasp, and they are the temples here. And then Keter is that sphere of energy that, so imagine this is the bottom of a sphere, and it goes up like that. And then there's 2 spheres here, black and gray. And then as we come down, we've got at the shoulders, Gebura and Hesed, Daath at the throat center, and then Tifereth, dead center at the solar plexus, the shining sun. You can put, for your holy guardian angels, you can put Mikael or Raphael there, or any other that you want.